Welcome, everyone, and happy first day of spring. I can't believe we're already at the end of March. I'm Katie Capuzzo, Director of Community at WISE, and together we're a global community dedicated to empowering the next generation of women in sales. Huge thanks to our partners for making these events possible, and special thanks to Ashby and Contentful for lending us the panelists on screen with me today. Sales is often synonymous with pressure, from hitting quota to juggling customer feedback with internal bandwidth. So today we're discussing ways to navigate that pressure while also getting confidence in your own viewpoint and perspective on things. Joining me in that conversation is Amber West, Enterprise Account Executive at Ashby, and Isabella Ciampa, Enterprise Account Manager at Contentful. So Amber, I'll hand it over to you first to tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I'm at Ashby. We sell an applicant tracking system. I am in the enterprise segment. I found my way into sales through a bit of zigging and zagging through my career. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I started my career as a social worker and have found my way into sales.
Thanks, Amber. Isabella?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Isabella. I also go by Bella. I am an enterprise account manager at Contentful. And at Contentful, we are a digital experience platform, um, more commonly CMS in the past, but we are evolving. And originally, I'm from Los Angeles, but I actually made the move to New York City last year. Been with Contentful for about 4 years, and yeah, happy to be here.
Great. Well, so excited to have both of you today. I was telling the panelists before we joined, this is our first time utilizing Zoom webinar. We used to use a different platform. So if there's any kinks in the process, let us know afterward, but definitely let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat if that went to everyone the first time I sent it just to the panelists and myself. So resend that out. I know there's a lot of us tuning in from a lot of different locations today. Um, Throughout the conversation, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat feature or the ask a question feature at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get to that during the last 10 minutes or so of our chat today. So let's kick it off. This is a question for both of you, and Amber, would love your take first. What's the best lesson you've learned about speaking up and developing confidence in your ideas?
Yeah, I would say the best lesson that I've learned, if you were to sum it up in a few words, is to perfect the art of managing up and across. So, what I mean by that is, like, who else is going to be impacted by your idea? Who else is going to care about it? Would they be willing to be a unified front with you? So, it's always going to go over a little bit better if you're able to demonstrate that somebody else cares about this thing or agrees with you. So, I've definitely taken the former approach where I have this fantastic idea and I just kind of try to charge forward with it without kind of taking a step back and being a bit more thoughtful. And then I think the other side of this is to think about who potentially is going to be a blocker and why. So who might object to your idea and think it's not a good idea, and really be thoughtful about that as well. And then consider, like, what do they care about? How could you influence that person? Is it through data? Is it through case studies? Who do they respect in the organization? And can you get that person on your side? So try to, I guess, like, summing it up, perfecting the art of managing up and across, I think would be like figuring out the internal politics and thinking of those before you kind of charge forward with your idea.
Mhm. I love that. Think about who could have an objection to it and get ahead of it. Go ahead and have your answer prepared for that. That's really good advice. Bella, anything to add there?
Yeah, great points, Amber. I think for me personally, as I think about this question, I think my most important lesson that I've learned over time is that I feel my most confident when I'm really coming from a place of being authentic to myself. And what I kind of mean by that is I am someone who is still like pretty early in my career. I'm also, I feel younger compared to sometimes some of the people that I'm in the room with who have a lot of tenure and experience in their roles. And sometimes I think it's just like I want to impress people. And when I'm coming from that place, I find that I'm actually like a little bit more reserved and not as open as I usually am. So I've done a lot of like reflection and also just trying to build my skills around that of like how can I be more confident in speaking up. And one thing that I've actually done is I've worked with a life coach, And it was such an amazing, like, transformative experience because one of the things that she made me do was over 90 days, I was tracking what we call stirrings. And stirrings are almost like this intuitive pull. You kind of just you feel something inside of you to maybe speak up or do an action. And sometimes what I've learned is that when I have these stirrings, I maybe wouldn't act on them and I would kind of, just be reserved, kind of swallow my words. But what I've learned through just the reflection part of it is when I actually do speak on these stirrings and it's coming from an authentic, intuitive place, something valuable is always coming out on the other end. And tracking that like over 90 days was huge for me. And it really just allows me to think better about like my decision making process. And yeah, I like suggest anyone to do it, even if it's just like for a week or a month, like definitely try it. It's really impactful.
How did she advise that you recognize a stirring? Is it sort of that like gut check that you have in yourself sometimes, or you want to say something and you hesitate and just write it down instead?
Yeah, so I think how she explained it to me was that everyone kind of feels it differently. For me, I would say it's definitely like more of a gut thing for sure. Or maybe like you kind of feel it like more in your heart or more in like your head. Like for me, I find that if I like keep returning to the thought too, it's almost like I can't rest until I do something. So that's like for me what works. And yeah, I think that, like I said, everyone kind of has their own style or maybe like own way of exploring it. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful in kind of giving clarity around what a stirring is.
Yeah, it's good to be aware of that. I think we all experience that in those situations where it's like there was something there. I wanted to say something, I wanted to contribute in some way. And some I've heard, yeah, it's like a physical thing, and some it's more mental. So that's
Yeah.
helpful to think on and look more into. Speaking of high pressure situations, as the topic is, apparently the chat is not enabled. So no one is going to be able to drop in where they're tuning in from today. But the good news is you can drop in your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So thank you whoever put that note to me in the Q&A box. Still ask your questions there and we will get the chat feature figured out for next time. Amber, this question is for you. Your career began as a social worker and you've pivoted a couple of times since then. Walk us through the highlights of how you went from social worker to IO psychologist to enterprise seller, who, by the way, was awarded AE of the Year in 2024 at Ashby.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of this relates to what Bella was saying, essentially, like know yourself. So take the time to get to know yourself. When I was a social worker, where I started my career, we learned about this philosophy or methodology of working with clients called a strength-based approach. And the core of that is exactly what it sounds like. Like every person has core strengths, no matter how like desperate the situation seems, there is a strength to be found. And so I kind of really took that to heart and took it sort of like not just to approach the way I worked with my clients, but really think about myself and identify my own strengths and really get to know myself fairly well. And I sort of took that and thought about throughout my career. So, kind of Cliff Notes version of my career journey was I went from a social worker, went back to grad school, for IO psychology. I ended up working in people analytics and selection and assessment, where I happened to have bought a lot of tech and I worked with a lot of vendors. And then I went to work for a vendor as a subject matter expert in the sales cycle, so pre-sales consulting, and then found my way into an enterprise AE role. So that's sort of like the jobs I held along the path. The way that I got there and the way that that journey happened was really around this idea of knowing what strengths I had and what really fueled me, what was kind of innate. So when I was a social worker, one of the things I was able to leverage and like do incredibly well was influencing others and creating change. It's very important in that type of a role. And I found when I went into people analytics, I was doing that also, but just in a much more objective way. So a lot more science than art in that people analytics role around influencing other with data and kind of really business decisions and influencing folks there. And then when I went into the pre-sales consulting role, which was terrifying, by the way, to move from a people analytics practitioner into like to me, my point of view of salespeople was not positive at that time. Like I think there's just a lot of stereotypes out there. So I was very hesitant and very uncertain. What would that be like? And it took me a long time to really embrace like my sales persona. I really held on to the IO psychologist, subject matter expert side for a very long time. But over time, I really did discover that sales is sort of this perfect blend of the art of social work and the science of people analytics, kind of like the people skills, like that influencing through like soft skills and influencing through objective measures. And found that I kind of found this sweet spot in sales where I really felt like my core strengths were like all of them were being tapped into versus just solely focusing on like one subset of my strengths. So that's kind of how I found the journey. Always kept an open mind, like said yes to opportunities and really focused on like building authentic relationships with folks and leaning in and just kind of keeping an open mind to what was possible.
We're going to talk a little bit about that transition into sales in the beginning because for a lot of people who haven't done it before, breaking into that role for the first time can be daunting, it can be scary, and it can honestly be hard to get the job to begin with. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But separate from that, throughout your career transitions, that can be a pressure filled environment too, going through the interview process, changing roles, and then changing industries and actual titles and functions altogether. What do you think served you so well in those processes to not only help you reaffirm this is the decision, the right decision and the move I want to make, and also land the jobs that you were seeking at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge part of it was having a good understanding of what transferable skills I had, like what were my strengths, what did I have to offer that was different, how could I stand out in the interview process, but then my first 60-90 days in role, how would I be able to stand out and differentiate myself from others in the role? And so I think a lot of it comes down to like being authentic. I know Bella mentioned that as well, but I think there's so much to say about that. Being authentic, really knowing yourself, trusting your gut as well, I think is a core piece. I think women are more likely in the workplace to have a really hard time feeling confident and not trusting yourself. And I think there's a lot to say. Like that first jump I made from people analytics into pre-sales consulting and being like embedded in the sales team, I was really fortunate to have joined a sales organization that had a lot of women. Like there were a lot of strong enterprise women sellers on that team. And I think that kind of influenced a huge like reason why I stuck with sales and why I was able to grow in sales, because I think it does matter. I've also had some fantastic men in my sales career who have been great mentors and really supportive, but it's very different when you have strong, supportive women to look up to and to learn from.
Mm-hmm. And along the lines of that too, with the stereotypes that you mentioned, of what you thought sales was going to be like, I would imagine when you got into that atmosphere, either those stereotypes were true, but you just had a different perspective of them once you got in it, or they weren't true at all.
Yeah, I would say it was a lot less true than I thought. So the team was a lot more collaborative, a lot more like I was like, just expecting like really like cutthroat, like kind of grimy, like sales pros, like a lot, like all the worst stereotypes is really what I was expecting. And I was like, I'll just figure out a way to navigate through it. And the organization that I joined happened to be like a very collaborative, very team selling oriented sales culture. And so I was technically sales support, but I never felt like an order. Like I wasn't being given orders. I was partnering with the sales team, which made a huge difference as well. And it really opened the door for me to learn from the AEs that I was working with and really get that opportunity. But I think culture, not just of the company, but sales culture specifically, plays a huge, huge role in that.
Yeah. Well, the culture that we're going to transition to, Contentful, with Bella has been fantastic as she was sharing with us behind the scenes a little while ago. Bella, after a stint in marketing, you transitioned to Contentful as a sales development rep. You've had two promotions since then and were part of building out the account management function at Contentful. Having never done the AM role before, how did you build conviction in your viewpoints early on?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there's actually a quote that I think of, and it's the cold water doesn't get warmer if you jump in late. And I think as someone who is naturally a very um like an overthinker, I am constantly thinking about this and reminding myself, but specifically when I did make the move or the promotion, I should say, from SDR to account manager, I remember feeling so nervous because this was the first time that I was being trusted, with this massive book of business, and I was dealing with, $1 million and making proposals for the first time and asking for price uplifts. And I was just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to learn all this? Like, I don't even know what's right, what's wrong. And I think a lot of it just came from to trying and failing and doing something good and leaning on others for help and not being afraid to ask for help, I think also takes a lot of confidence. Um, like don't let your ego, stop you there. But there's also a podcast I was listening to like a couple weeks ago. This was very timely with this panel, and it was about building confidence. I know Mel Robbins is like really trending right now, but she does have a great podcast. And she was talking about research behind building confidence. And one of them actually that she was saying was trying. And I think the worst part is when you're just thinking about, oh my gosh, like what's going to be on the outcome of this if I do try it? Am I going to fail? That's usually why we're scared to do anything really. Or is it going to be great? And I think like on top of all of that, it's the more that you can just do things and just trust that they're going to work out and you're going to gain a valuable lesson either way, um, is what's important. And I had to think about too, like, okay, when I was, in marketing and I was doing campaigns, some things did work out, whereas others didn't. And as an SDR, making cold calls, like some calls are going to be really awkward and painful, and they were. And some other ones, as I got better at it, they felt more natural, and I learned things and little pieces of things that I could apply to my future calls. And the same thing as an account manager. It's like I'm more equipped now from the experiences that I had with, renewals churning, upset customers, sending out a proposal with the wrong information. I mean, like these things happen, but the only way that I could gain conviction in myself is if I just did it and not always having my hand held in the process, honestly. Um, but yeah, it just takes time. But when I think about how far I've come in the past, I think it's been like 3 years now. I laugh about the things that I used to be so stressed out over because now I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's all going to work out. And yeah, it just takes time. That's the beauty of it.
Mhm. Yeah, the repetition, that piece of it really does make things feel easier the more you do it. It's funny when you mentioned about failure. I interviewed Eric Eyersbidon, who's the former CEO of Barstool Sports, for Wise's podcast, which everyone should check it out. It's called Journey Untold. But she calls it fail always mode. And it's this idea of like you should constantly be failing because that means you're trying and you are hopefully in an environment where you're able to do that and adapt quickly and figure new things out because you failed. So, not to be afraid of that. I think that's fantastic. You learned that so early in your career, since you said that this was all new to you. So, great job learning and trying and failing. When I guess the rebound time, since you said that this is something was new to you at first, failing and rebounding and being able to adapt quickly, were there any tools that you utilized or mindset shifts to be able to bounce back more quickly?
That's a good question. Honestly, I think it's partly from building thick skin from when I was younger. I used to be a competitive dancer, and I don't know if anyone is familiar with that type of activity or like sport. Because it is, I would say, a sport in some ways. I would, you make mistakes, you're failing, you're you're practicing something that is very performance heavy, and you have to be like uniform, and you have to remember memorize a routine and all of these things. And unfortunately, it was a place where sometimes, depending on the situation I was in, it would be a more harsh environment about making mistakes. And then it kind of evolved because I, changed teams and environments, dancing for my high school dance team, etc. Like it became more healthy over time. And I think not that work is the same as competitive dance, but I think sometimes I would feel bad about making a mistake because I didn't want it to seem as like I'm not doing a good enough job, because that's sometimes the mindset I would get into. Um, and yeah, I think it's just like because I had dealt with it so much in the past, I had to remember that it does get better over time. And I think you said something really interesting, Katie. You're like, you have to have a supportive environment. And I think I'm very lucky that working at Contentful has provided that for me. I've never felt, you know, shamed or bad about making a mistake. It's always been like, okay, like, we made this mistake. It's fine. Let's fix it. Or, you know what? A customer has churned. It happens. How do we fix it in the future? Like, how can we retain better customers? Can we get ahead of risk earlier? Like, I think it really does start with leadership setting the tone of that,
Mhm.
and being a part of an organization that can provide that like safe place for you to learn and to grow. And I think also, especially starting out, our leader, Emily, like she understood that we were a younger, newer team to this. Like we haven't been doing account management for 10 years. And she had that understanding. And I think that she was like, you know what? Some things are just going to happen, but we just got to roll with it.
Mhm.
Like we're not saving lives at the end of the day. It's something that she would always say. And I loved that, because it's so true. And we just have to like keep pushing forward.
Yeah. To not let a high pressure situation be more serious than it has to be, I think is such a healthy thing to experience. This
Yeah.
question is for both of you, and Amber, we'll start with you. It seems like most often preparation can ease the stress that comes in these high pressure situations. How do you organize your week or prioritize both planned and unplanned daily tasks, for example?
Yeah, I definitely feel whenever you feel prepared, it definitely takes a layer of pressure off. I think my number one tool remains like I'm old school. I have a notebook. If I write things down, like the physical action of writing things down, it cements in my brain a lot better than typing things out. So to-do list, I kind of start my day there and then have the satisfaction of actually crossing things off when I finish them. So that's something that super old school has stuck with me. I am
It
not
is so
a
satisfying, though, to cross off the
yeah,
list. I have
yeah.
mine as well.
And it's just like to me, it like keeps it in my brain a little bit better than if I like type it up into a Google Doc or something. So I that's kind of where I start my day, start my week, kind of resetting each day, really thinking of like what are the 3 to 5 things I have to get done today, I have to find time for. Beyond that, I use my calendar for like focus time blocks for regular things. Prospecting is one, right? Like as an AE, full cycle AE, like you if you don't find time to build pipeline, future you is going to be real upset with past you. So making that time, prioritizing that. And then the other thing is admin tasks. Like those are things that AEs don't like doing, but when I talked earlier about like managing up, that is one of the easiest ways to like not even think about managing up. But if RevOps isn't bothering you and you're not making their job harder, like they will be a stakeholder for you if you need something from them. If your boss doesn't have to remind you to submit forecast, if your boss doesn't have to ask you to do the updates in HubSpot that they're looking for, like know which fields they care about and just update those. That's just like kind of a set it and forget it way to manage up. So I try to stay on top of that, despite like those are the things that AEs hate doing the most, but the other stakeholders in your sales life really care about those things. So I try to be mindful of that. And then the other thing that I do is I develop sort of personal SLAs for any activities that drive revenue for me. Like I'm not here to make a base salary. I am here to drive revenue and get a bigger paycheck. So I prioritize certain things like follow-ups after a call with a client within 24 hours at least. Um, Never showing up to a client call unprepared. So I always prioritize making that time, whether it's like first thing in the morning or the end of my day to prep for the next day, to make sure I know who I'm meeting with, what are they probably going to care about, what's the objective of the call, do I have any SMEs joining me on that call, and have I set them up for success? That also helps with internal stakeholder management. I think one of the hardest things about being an AE is you're the quarterback, and there are tons of stakeholders to manage in your deal, but also internally within the organization. And so making sure that you're not dropping the ball internally and externally is really important. And that's kind of like my North Star. I think I try to think and make sure I'm not dropping the ball anywhere. And I've had prospects kind of just say in passing, later in cycle, they'll break up with the other vendor, and they'll make a comment very often that their experience with me felt different because I never dropped the ball. And I'm like, well, that really feels like a low bar, but
it's not. I
yes.
think a lot of customers are disappointed with different services. For you, you may have been about to answer this question, but how do you, I guess, keep eyes on all the balls that are in the air to make sure you don't drop one?
Yeah, I try really hard to think ahead of in my deals. So I have the luxury of being an enterprise sales, so that means a lower volume but higher complexity deals. I think it's tougher if you're in mid market or startup segments to do this because the velocity and the volume that you're dealing with is so much higher. So there you would probably have to prioritize like which deals are you going to really stay on top of in this way. But we use HubSpot. I use the not the list view, but there's like a grid view of your deals, so you can see each deal in each stage, and then you can also customize your view in HubSpot to see like when the last task was or the last email went out, and it's pretty visual and it's quite easy to see. And then also checking like dashboards as well in HubSpot to make sure again that I'm like keeping up on the things that leadership cares about. But I really do use that HubSpot view, and I try to dedicate kind of starting each day. I don't have meetings early in the morning. Again, luxury of being on the East Coast. I think that's harder if you're on the West Coast. You might have to flip flop this and do this at the end of your day. But I do this at the beginning of my day. When I log on, I really sort of look across my deals and see like who's been like not responding, who do I need to push, who do I need to nurture, because we're like in a limbo pattern because there's a board meeting in 2 weeks, but I don't want to be quiet for 2 weeks with them. So just kind of trying to stay on top of those types of things, really using that HubSpot grid deal view.
I'm sure not everyone will be able to do this, but similarly to what you're saying of not having calls in the morning, I started blocking the first hour of my mornings every day to just not have any meetings, no calls,
Mm-hmm.
internal or otherwise, for that purpose of just getting through some of the stuff that maybe didn't get totally done the day before, or honestly, it's things that
Mm-hmm.
have come in the last few hours of the night before or the morning of, to where I'm like, I need to now get ahead of this. So that has made a big difference in my calendar, just having that standard catch up block every
Mm-hmm.
morning. So if you
Yeah.
can do it, do it.
Yes.
Bella, anything that you would add there to how you stay prioritized during the week or on task during the day?
Yeah, and Amber, I loved what you had to say about the like giving yourself SLAs. I'm gonna steal that one. It's probably better than time batching for me. Time batching is a little hard, but what I do is I love to have also first like hour, 30 minutes of my day to not have calls. I call this like my prep for the day. And I will sort out, okay, like what are my urgent tasks? What are reactive tasks? So things I need to get to, but maybe I don't have to get done today. And then I also have another bucket for proactive tasks. And I actually use because we use a lot of Google tools internally at Contentful, and I love like the tasks app that comes with Google. If anyone's familiar with it, you can create like essentially little like to-do boards or task boards, and you can separate them. So I have one for urgent, reactive, proactive, etc. And, I'll check them off and like each task. I'll sort things there, kind of you can move things back and forth, which is really nice too. And that just helps me stay accountable, and it's looped into my Google Calendar as well, so you can see your tasks with what you have going on for that day, like call wise. And yeah, it's just been a really great way to start the day and just make sure that I'm not forgetting little things. I also love writing things down, because I do find that like pen and paper, it does allow me to remember them as well. But I've just found that the Google task way has just been easier for me to like really centralize all my tasks instead of having them in different places. But
Mhm.
yeah, just finding what works for you.
I am curious from both of you, since you're both ICs, but you are on different sides of the coin, one as an AE, one as an account manager, and this common phrase we hear from people, I'm putting out fires. So, do you have a lot of fires that are unexpected that come up in your days, or do things typically go as planned, at least so much as you can control your calendar?
Hmm. I think like fires come up. I think any customer facing role, you're going to have fires that come up because there's a lot that's not in your control. I think for my role as an AE, the fires that come up are probably one of two things. One is we are in red lines and we're trying to get the contract executed, and like time is money and time kills all deals and all those things. So you have to be incredibly reactive. Like even I was on a trip at the end of last year and we were trying to get a deal done, and we hadn't gotten red lines back, and I'm like on the cruise ship like checking my email, and they had responded but it had gone to our spam. Like for whatever reason, all of a sudden their emails were going to our spam. So the red lines had just been sitting there for a few days with us not seeing them. So things like that just happen, and that's not in my control. It's not in the control of the people who were covering the deal for me. Like it went to their spam too. And so you just have to like stay on top of certain things like that. And then the other type of fire is generally a fire that results of like a risk that I didn't identify. So something pops up that seems out of the blue from the prospect that they either misunderstood we could do something we can't do, and now we have to reset expectations, or they have some new requirement that I probably should have uncovered during discovery that I failed to. So those ones hurt worse, I would say, because those feel like I should have had control over those. And those feel to me a lot more stressful than the process oriented ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, yes, we definitely have some fires that come up. I would say it's more related to if something's maybe gone wrong with a customer, and let's say like their for some reason like their content is down, um, and they've looped in support, maybe support hasn't answered their question yet, like that can be a little bit of a fire. But also from like a deal perspective, I have definitely I'm actually working on a deal right now that is also going through some legal challenges. And yeah, it's always kind of at the 11th hour, it feels like right when you're racing against the clock. And of course with renewals we have more of a set deadline, so there's like a point that we have to get things wrapped up. And yeah, I think it really just is about working collaboratively, cross-functionally is huge, obviously, staying organized. And I mean, pretty much to what Amber was saying, in customer-facing roles, you're almost taking on that understanding that it's customer facing. Things are just going to pop up out of your control, and you just kind of have to figure it out, even if you're on vacation. And, even if you do have people covering for you, I always kind of like to be a little bit checked in, even if I am out, taking PTO if I have like a renewal that's going on, let's say. But Yeah, I mean, what I do love about my role though is that if I know that I have a renewal going on, maybe I won't plan a vacation around it unless I like absolutely have to go out for whatever reason. But um yeah, it's always you always learn something new too from putting out fires. Let's just put it that way. But it also makes the job interesting and it's always fun coming out on the other side of the challenge and it's very rewarding.
And well, you might sleep better that night once the fire is put out because you had so much adrenaline that you at least know you're in for a good night's sleep, or you could just be replaying the whole event in your head. Hopefully, you're not one of those people. What's funny is kind of this all ties into us talking about preparation and just doing what you can do, the things you can control to put yourself in the best situation you can when these high pressure situations come up, because they're going to come up regardless. I was home a few weeks ago and my mom still works part time, and we're both working remotely from the house, and she said something about, that phrase, don't put off for tomorrow what you could do today. And I remember her saying that as a kid, but it hit me different this time because I've been in that situation where I don't know how many times I have to learn that lesson where I'll say, well, I'll just do it tomorrow. And inevitably six things come up or the fires come up that you don't plan for, that you then get derailed and have to cram that in or don't get that done and you really should have that day. So it's a lesson I continue to have to learn. Wanted to quick clarify one thing. Someone put in a note about SLA. That stands for service level agreement, and basically the expectations that are outlined for you as a vendor to a customer or reverse of how you're going to operate. Anything you would elaborate on there, Amber, since you mentioned that a couple times, the SLA?
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like, what are you holding yourself accountable to? We use it a lot in the SaaS tech world for like vendor uh, promises, I would say.
Yes. Okay, Amber, this one is you, and it's funny because Bella was just talking about closing a deal. Fingers crossed that that goes through today, tomorrow.
Yeah.
But closing deals is a big part of the AE function, and you hadn't done that before joining CrossCheck as an AE a few years ago. I would imagine there was a lot of pressure to ramp quickly in that role coming in as an AE and sort of skipping a step if that was the lens they were viewing it from. How did you
Mhm.
learn and eventually succeed in that role, and then the ones you've had since?
Yeah. So it took a good bit of convincing to get me to make the jump from a solution consultant to AE. And I had the luxury of going right into an enterprise AE role at CrossCheck as a startup. They wanted me to help build the enterprise practice. So they weren't selling into big enterprises yet, but they wanted to get there. And I had really good experience working with enterprises and having worked inside an enterprise as well, in an HR function. So I think first and foremost, like, work for someone that you trust, admire, and can learn from. So I had the like wonderful benefit of being recruited into that role by one of my top performing AEs, that I was his solution consultant, and he got the head of sales role at that company, and he really wanted me to come be his AE and help build the practice with him. There were some other AEs there, but they didn't have enterprise experience. And so he just really kind of coached me and convinced me to take the leap and trust him. And I did, and sort of like jumped in and took the huge leap of faith and just sort of had to approach it as like, there's a lot to learn. I'm going to have to go into this with a lot of humility and a lot of just willingness to fail forward, I think was really my point of view there. But if I hadn't had someone that I really trusted to do that with, I don't know that it would have gone so well. When I was in people analytics, though, I bought a lot of SaaS. So I understood how people buy technology, even though I hadn't managed it from the AE side before. So I did feel like I had like a bit of understanding of the most tricky parts of what happens at the end of a deal. I joke a lot that HR buyers accidentally lie to their AE all the time. And I'm pretty sure it is accidental, but it's not their full-time job. And they do really think they have funding, and they do really think that they're the decision maker, and they do really think that everything is going to go well. So I had sort of that skepticism coming in. I think I understood that coming in. So I feel like even though I hadn't physically like had the closing job, I had all this other context that was really helpful. And then one thing I did not expect, I don't think, was like people had talked to me about it, but I didn't have the full understanding of the feeling of being an AE, really being like sink or swim. Like it is really high pressure and it like everything falls on you. And I had to work pretty hard not to let that overwhelm me and really just keep perspective and focus on what I could control and really learning how to look around corners. And I think maybe to my benefit that I hadn't done this before and I was like somewhat anxious about like making a big mistake or like really failing, I learned a lot about risk mitigation and it's something that I do quite well in my deal cycles now. Like I can usually, not 100% of the time, but I can often anticipate like what are the risks and I can get ahead of those. I ask my prospects really direct questions. And I think it lends itself well in that I have the credibility that I used to work in HR as well. So I think it's like I have this perfect storm of context and prior experience to where I was able to come in and I had to learn how to be a quarterback and like what that meant. So I think that was actually a little bit harder than the actual negotiation and closing aspect. That was really fun for me to learn. But the strategically using all your resources and learning how all the pieces fit together and in enterprise sales, like who are all the stakeholders and how are they going to influence your deal internally and like the politics of selling an enterprise deal inside your own organization is kind of challenging. And I think that was actually harder for me.
And did learning that just come with time and repetitions?
Yeah, I would definitely say I probably pissed a few people off and learned some lessons um, and had really good coaches and like who gave me good constructive feedback around like hey, yeah, like this is your deal but here are all the other considerations to make and like here's how to go about that a bit differently. And then I took a step back and I'm mostly what drove that behavior was like the stress and the pressure I was feeling. And so like really taking a step back and thinking a bit differently about it. And this leader that brought me into that role, I think one time I was kind of floundering a bit. And this was more about customer facing stuff. And he was like, you just need to remember, you're just a person talking to other people about buying technology. And I was like, oh, that's like oddly simple, but like really helpful and like calms me down and like brought me back down to like reality when it came to it.
Yeah. It's funny how we can sometimes build up these things in our minds and it sometimes needs to be knocked out from an outside perspective of like, oh, you're right. And then go into it with that. We're all just
Yeah.
people and it goes so much easier and better. And that, to your
Mm-hmm.
point, the thing that your buyers say about you is that you are so genuine and you kept the process moving so smoothly. And that's probably part of the reason is because you're treating them that way. So it's all
Yeah.
full circle. Bella, we spoke about making the transition from Denver to New York. Well, actually, you went LA, Denver, New York. And you were in Denver when you were at Contentful and needed to make that request to move. That was approved, thank goodness, but not overnight. What advice do you have for building credibility and advocating for yourself?
Yeah, I think like first and foremost, it's that your manager or leadership, like they can't read your mind. And I think the earlier that you can get ahead of something that is a personal or career goal, the better. And I had let my manager, Caitlin, know, I think like a year, like year and a half before anything had even happened, moving wise, that this is something that I wanted to do. And I think before all of that had even happened, I feel as if I did build really good rapport and trust over time, that allowed that move to be a lot easier and a lot more seamless and really not a problem like when we're thinking of like the HR aspects. And I think like being clear on what it is you want and why. for me, moving to New York, it wasn't just about like, oh, I just, want to move to New York because it sounds fun. For me, it was also, for some reason, I don't know why, again, it's just like an intuitive thing. I just always kind of felt that I needed to be in New York to help build my career. And I expressed that. I said, this is what I've always wanted to do from like, I don't know, as long as I can remember, really. And the timing just hasn't been right. And if there are any openings for like the New York, New Jersey territory, I would love to be considered and potentially move there one day if possible. And it's hard because, I obviously love Contentful, and being in Denver at the time, it was just kind of hard to figure that out and timing wise. But things moved, and, the colleague of mine that was in that role ended up actually moving to be an account executive, and they considered me for the territory, and I, moved into that. And, slowly but surely, eventually my move got approved from there. But yeah, I think it's just like it's really about speaking up. And I think another thing too that I did, and I know this isn't exactly the case for everyone or just you're not able to do it, is that we had an office in Denver. We also have an office in New York, but the office in Denver was something that I utilized, I think, to like my advantage in the sense that I was consistent. I went in, I showed my face, Also, my leaders would come in, and I think that naturally we just built a great relationship because we would see each other in person so much. And I think seeing your leadership face to face does just naturally build trust over time. And they trust that, okay, like even though she's not maybe going to show up in Denver because she doesn't live here anymore, that doesn't mean that when she moves to New York, she's just gonna, disappear. And yeah, and that's not the only reason why I went into the office. I naturally just wanted to go. But I think just figuring out ways that, like you, or in my case, like where you can work with what you have available to you at your company and make it work specifically for you. So because we had that flexibility, I really realized that, okay, like I have this now, what can I do to get there? Um, and yeah, I feel like I do that in a few other ways too, but more specifically, like this move was really big for me and we made it work. It was great.
Yeah. Love the making your intentions known and advocating for yourself, letting your manager in on some plans that you hope for because they aren't a mind reader. And sometimes it's helpful to drop that early, even if it is just something you're thinking on. There's one more question for both of you that I have. If anyone does have any other questions, please drop them into the Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those in 1 or 2 minutes. So the last question for both of you, and Amber, we'll start with you. What recommendations do you have for navigating conflict, be it internal or external, since sometimes conflict can add to the pressure-filled situation?
Yeah, I think the root of most conflicts is a misunderstanding. So leading with curiosity is key. Like, what don't you know that the other party knows or thinks that they know might be the case. So I think that's kind of, if you can approach conflict in that way of like, there's something I don't know here, there's something I'm missing, and try to discover that first. Being direct, I think, is incredibly helpful. Showing empathy. I had like a kind of a sticky like end of cycle. I think it was like maybe 2 days before contract signature. A like concern came up from the buyer, came from a competitor who was like throwing fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the decision the buyer had made to go with Ashby. But it was a real concern for my buyer. And they sent me a pretty direct email about it. And it's like one of those fires, right, that you have to put out. But it's kind of contentious when you go in because they're like, hey, is XYZ true? I have concerns. I'm not sure if this is right. And so I just approached it as like, it sounds to me like you're worried that you don't know something about us that you should know to make a confident decision. And they were like, oh, yes, that's exactly how I feel. Like, I'm uncertain now. And so I think that just was really helpful for them to like disarm the beginning of the conversation, because I didn't just come in hot on the defensive and be like, well, we already talked about this. We're the best. We do XYZ and we're a great fit because of all of these things. I just tried to understand where they were coming from, and the conversation went completely different. And like, we didn't really have to go into defense mode. We just had like a genuine conversation about what their concerns were and why they had concerns. So I think that like that approach, whatever it is, in terms of the conflict, if you can kind of try to see it from the other person's perspective and then be bold enough to ask them if your assumption is correct. Because if it's not, they'll correct you and then they'll probably tell you what the real problem is.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I was a recruiter previously, and that was always something that we did. You could hear one thing and then ask the clarifying question, or this is what I'm hearing. Does that sound right? Is that what you mean? And sometimes they'll be like, no, that's not what I meant. And then you can get on the same page. But how important is that to go in that way? So, really helpful advice. Bella, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said, Amber. I find myself handling situations very similar when I have conflicts. I would say that more often than not, it's more external conflict than internal. Um, I mean, from my side, again, like with more on the renewal side of things, especially, we'll have customers who sometimes want to get out of a contract. And it's like, okay, how am I gonna figure this one out? And a lot of the times I have found that it's not their worry of why they're trying to, cancel their services with us. I can't take it at face value. It's usually like a different reason. It's just asking the right questions to get there. But I also think, aside from all of that, not taking conflict, whether it's external or internal in some cases, not taking it personally. Um, a lot of things happen for a customer to maybe want to consider a different product or, whatever it is. And I think looking at it in the context of that helps me remove myself from the situation and think of things more strategically of how to progress forward and actually maybe how to save something. And it's just like leaning in for me. I personally get really anxious if I avoid conflict. So I really like to take it head on. I like to ask for help. I ask for help early and again, just asking direct questions like, hey, can you help me with this? Or can you help me understand this? Like, just don't be afraid. I also like working under pressure, so I think it also helps just naturally. But yeah, I think just all of those things are just helpful for me when I think about conflict.
Yeah. This is a fun question that got sent in. Do you have a mantra or phrase or quote that helps you succeed in high pressure environments?
I mean, I think we kind of already talked about this, or you two did, but for me, like when I was a social worker, I literally would be like saving people. Like I would sometimes get, like, I would be the safety plan if my client was considering suicide. That never happens here. And so, like, I just tell myself, like, you know what? This isn't that serious. Like, it's not, like, it will be fine. Everything is fine. No one is going to perish as a result of this. And so I just try to like tell myself that and like bring myself back down of like, yes, this feels really high stakes for me personally or like the company right now, but in the end, like in reality, everything will actually be fine.
Nothing like that as a perspective of, okay, it's not, take a step back. And I'm someone that I can react internally, at least, very um, big, I guess. And it's always internal, which is not always great, but I have a really big reaction of, okay, I need to jump on that right away or fix it. Sometimes taking a step back and take a breath and figure out what you're going to do can be really helpful. Bella?
I remember early on when I like first joined Contentful, I had a manager always say, you can't break it, or like, don't worry, like you're not gonna break it. And basically what that meant was similar, Amber, to what you're saying, like it it's sales. Like we're in tech sales. Like you're not gonna say something so wrong that it's going to, ruin everything that you've progressed towards, or, doing a cold call that's really awkward, like it's not going to break your career. And so I think just remembering that is helpful, and it does take pressure off a little bit. And again, we're human, like we're humans talking to humans at the end of the day. Like I think always having that human element really helps me to just relax and do my best work.
Mhm.
I'll add one too. I had a manager once say that action is the cure to anxiety. So again, sometimes like spinning your wheels of, oh, I need to do this, this, and this, or my plate feels very full, and that can all be true. And we have an event coming up on setting boundaries. So I'm not saying you have to be doing all the things all at once, but to take a step back and think, what are the action steps I need to take to get to the end result I'm looking at in this situation, can just be very helpful to visualize. These are the action steps, check them off. Okay, now that load feels lighter, move on to the next thing. So, well, thank you everyone. I don't see any other questions down here. We will get the chat feature working for the next event, but thank you ladies so much for joining us and sharing your perspectives. This was very helpful and also very timely as we're coming into spring, and also the summer slowdown can happen. So ways to stay proactive and on top of things, even during that time. We'll take some of these strategies into that as well. A few upcoming events to remind everyone about. Next Thursday, we have a workshop on public speaking led by two TEDx speakers, Jess Ekstrom and Lindsay Barcato. So definitely check that out. And then April 8th, we have another virtual panel on, like I mentioned, setting boundaries while also still exceeding goals. So if you want to sign up for those or any of our other events, you'll just go to womenandSalesEverywhere.com and the members tab, and it will take you to sign up for either a free option or a paid version of our programming. But I will leave everyone for here. Thank you so much for joining us.